Hello, today is October 2nd, 2020. Welcome to the latest installment of Ideally Speaking. My name is Paul Jenkins. I'm the University Librarian here at Franklin Pierce University, and I'm chair of the IDEAL Steering Committee. IDEAL stands for Initiative for Digital Education for Accelerated Learning. In 2018, the university was granted funds from the Davis Foundation in order to transform current undergraduate pedagogical practice at Pierce through the enhancement across the curriculum of digital skills and literacy. The aim of the Ideally Speaking podcasts and interviews is to acquaint listeners with the activities associated with the IDEAL initiative and to explore new approaches to digital literacy. Joining me today is graphic designer Tristen Click. Thanks for being with us today, Tristen.
Thanks for having me.
So can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so right now I'm a visual designer at Deloitte and do a little bit of everything for the emerging technology team. Last October, I completed my thesis at Vermont College of Fine Arts. I'm located in the greater Seattle area. I'm from here. And I went to San Diego State for my undergrad, bachelor's degree, and lived in Southern California for about 6 years. And yeah, I'm excited to chat more and talk about the work that I completed at Vermont College of Fine Arts.
What's the difference between being a visual designer and a graphic designer for a lay person like myself?
That's a good question. To me, titles don't mean anything because when you read the job descriptions, they can be so different. So in my experience, visual designer has a little bit more to do with the digital side. So even though one day I could be doing an infographic or an icon or a logo or something traditionally graphic design based, I could also be wireframing out a website, and that's more kind of the visual design side. And so that's just what this title for this position happened to be.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So your work explores connection as a main driver in human social behavior. How did you become interested in this topic?
Yeah, so within graphic design, I always had found myself wanting to do something else after being on the computer, working on Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator all day long. I started painting. I do a lot of resin artwork. During my graduate thesis, I actually took some pottery classes, and I really started asking myself, why do I feel better after doing these things, whether it's something tactile or different smells or anything like that. And kind of how does that influence my mood and how do others resonate with that? And I remembered seeing a poster that was for a pianist, and when you went up and touched it, the keys actually made sound. And I remembered that resonating with me. And so that kind of sparked what is making these things more impactful, and then how do others connect with that, and why does it resonate more with me?
Yeah, interesting. So tell us a little bit about your thesis that you referred to earlier and any other research that you've conducted.
Yeah, so for my thesis, I really started focusing on the 5 senses and different ways that that can be paired with graphic design. So like I mentioned, kind of the tactile, which is what I did most of my research on using Makey Makey. And since I've done workshops at different colleges and kind of just taking designers out of that, sitting at the computer zone and working collaboratively and tactile. Within the thesis itself, I used like some motion triggered lights, dark and light area. I had a smell station where you would go up and they were clear vials and kind of test your sense of smell. I had a scratch and sniff wallpaper. So really just exploring within graphic design, immersive environments, experiential, how to engage all those senses. And since then, I have been, applying to conferences and continuing reflecting on that work and I did SEGD, which is Experimental Graphic Design Conference. And one piece that I added on and researched was kind of looking at this pandemic and COVID effects of my thesis, since it was so much about in-person and interacting with your body and things like that.
You mentioned Makey. What's that?
Yeah. So the Makey, it was made by MIT Media Lab. And essentially, if you don't know anything about coding, a 5-year-old could figure out how to use it. There's just these little metal alligator clips, and you hook that to anything conductive. So that could be a banana, that could be conductive paint ink, that could be anything foil. So basically, once you connect those things, they have a website that you actually don't have to do coding. You drag and drop kind of if-then statements. So if I touch, let's say you have the green alligator clip hooked up to option 1. If I touch this, then it meows. Or if I do this, it makes a certain sound. And so basically anyone can kind of start mocking up or playing with interactive tools without that huge learning curve of like having to know code. I will say as you get more complex or have more ideas and take it further, if you really get interested in it, you'll want to take it a step further and get something like a Raspberry Pi or these things that use a little bit of coding language like Arduino. But Makey is great, and I've used it in a ton of my workshops, and it's just a really easy, playful tool to start kind of brainstorming with.
That sounds like it would be a good one for me at my level of knowledge with things like that. I'll have to investigate that. So you've worked with a very diverse group of clients, the U.S. Army, Google, real estate companies, sustainable energy firms. How have these experiences varied, and what components have been similar in your work with all of them?
Yeah, so I was actually active duty in the Coast Guard, and so that was kind of how I started working the Army position. Basically, I kind of wanted to see what the civilian meets graphic design meets military background side was like. So I worked at Madigan Army Medical Center for a while doing graphic design. And while I got to do some really cool projects like the anniversary of the hospital and have a logo like carved out of ice, which is just a very military over the top thing that you would never think about. As you would guess, there were a lot of things that were just needed to be mundane and very government oriented. And so while I enjoyed my time there, that was kind of, it felt like a barrier for me. I couldn't always push things. And then working with Google kind of was the opposite in the sense that it was very fast paced and always, okay, we have a new product coming out, stay within these brand guidelines, but come up with something new. And so that was a short contract job, but really enjoyed my time there and worked with a large team of designers. And at the real estate company, as well as CleanSpark, the sustainable energy company, I was the main designer working with a lot of non-designers. So my hat kind of shifted from just being someone, creating websites, one-pagers, things like that, and really teaching and, influencing non-designers on what is editable, what is not, what is a good choice for this, how can we make this look better? Let's not send out presentations where our own logo is stretched, and really kind of more becoming a trainer in that sense. And also now I teach at School of Visual Concepts part-time. So they have a 5-week course called Visual Design for UX. And basically anyone in this UX design program that is focused mostly on web, mobile, interaction design, user flows, they don't really have a graphic design background. And so in 5 weeks, I attempt to give them a little bit of typography, color, layout that can hopefully make their designs look better. And so with all of those different experiences, that's kind of what I enjoy doing now. I like working on a little bit of everything with completely different tools and different types of people.
So what are the most common misunderstandings with, you refer to them as non-designers, and I'm certainly one of them. What are some of the most common misunderstandings about graphic design principles that non-designers don't understand, and what are some of the things you like continually reinforce with your clients who aren't as familiar with these concepts?
Yeah. So when I'm kind of explaining, how things work or what it takes to design something, a common email I get is, "Can you do this really quick?" So I have to often say, it might seem small, and kind of explain and train them on how long things actually take and how long edits take and all of these little alignment things and stuff that they don't think about. I gave a training to my Deloitte non-designer stakeholders about presentations, and really not having paragraphs of text on the page and setting up a template for them to start with, and how simply making sure that the title on each page is the same font and the same size, leaving margins, and kind of just teaching these small little things that anyone can even do in PowerPoint, and how they can make the design look that much better. And another thing I run into is something being editable or not. So if I get a design request, hey, can you put these words with this image and make it look good? My first question is, are you going to be editing and changing it later? Or maybe it's a small graph. Because if I create it in my design tool and export it for you as a PDF, and then you're like, I want to edit it, I have to completely redesign it in something that you can edit in, like PowerPoint per se. So those are a lot of the things that I go over with non-designers, and most people are excited to learn because they want their stuff to look better without having to constantly reach out to a designer. So it's usually a good response.
Nice. So you mentioned the pandemic earlier, and it's very early in the process, even though it seems like forever. These last 6 months or so, time just seems to be elongated. But while it's still basically early in our exposure to the pandemic, have you observed any significant behavioral changes regarding the idea of connection and the resulting isolation among people that kind of informed your work?
Yeah, and I'll touch on this later in the presentation too. So when I originally wrote my thesis, it was kind of looking at the good and bad side of technology. I used the example of like having my phone in my pocket and thinking it buzzed and then it didn't. Like that's probably not a good thing. And just being sucked in. And then COVID and the pandemic happened. And the only way we can connect with others is, through these Zoom, Skype, online environments. And so something that I don't have the answers for, but try to combat that with is just be conscious of it. So like what things are changing as far as in my vision and my smells. We're probably smelling a lot more hand sanitizer and cleaning products. How is that affecting me? As far as visual, like when I'm walking down the street or walking in the store, I'm not staring at people necessarily, but your brain is kind of like, oh, that's a face. Oh, that person's looking at me. Oh, they're smiling, etc. And like, you don't have that piece anymore. When it comes to taste, I love eating at really good restaurants. I used to cook. So even though we can get takeout now and those things, like that's totally impacted and changed. And so something I've tried to just a little bit incorporate in my online Zoom classes is doing something tactile as an icebreaker. So one that I do is everyone take a pen and paper and draw the animal you feel like. So no judgment. It's just a good icebreaker and you're doing something with your hand and something different. If I had longer than 5 weeks, I'd like to do like a dinner party Zoom. So we all bring our food and we're sitting there eating and chatting, the first 15 minutes of class. And one other thing that I'm doing with some friends is sending a physical postcard. So designing, creating something, and then actually getting that in the mail and getting something tactile. So I don't know the total ways to combat that and that feeling of Zoom fatigue and disconnection and all of that. But I think just trying to be conscious of how it's affecting you is a good place to start.
Yeah, it's interesting. You read so much more into people's eyes now, because when they've got the mask on, a lot of times all you can really see is the eyes, and you start recognizing eyes and trying to sense how the other person is feeling just from their eyes. It's fascinating.
And eyebrows.
Yes, eyebrows. Yes. How do you think? What changes do you think are going to be permanent, stemming from this time that we've been isolated and relied more and more on technology? Let's say once the pandemic's passed, what are some things that are going to linger with us from our experiences?
Yeah, I can speak to locally what I know is going on. So REI, they're a huge company. A lot of people know about them. They had just got a new headquarters in Bellevue, which is just east of Seattle. They built this gorgeous new building, but now since they're 100% remote, they're actually going to be leasing or selling that and staying 100% remote because they found that their productivity was the same. So I think for work environments, some things are definitely going to stay more remote. And then let's say that like we get a vaccine or whatever the steps are to being able to, shake a stranger's hand again happens. I think people are still going to be wary. I think that it's going to take a long time to kind of, shake the behaviors that we're learning in this type of place and environment that we have now. And yeah, I'm not sure what will stay and what will be shaken. Hopefully people continue washing their hands.
What do you think are some of the, you mentioned earlier the pros and cons of technology, even before COVID-19. What do you see as some of the, I would say, first let's concentrate on the negative sides. What are, let's say in 40 years when sociologists or anthropologists are looking back on this time, what do you think are some negative changes in human behavior that they might observe stemmed from this kind of over-reliance on technology?
I think there's a lot of angles to look at that, and some I've already seen is how to, I guess, that social awareness, emotional intelligence, kind of when you go in a room and you meet strangers. I've noticed that if someone, their whole life has grown up kind of just locked in their room playing video games or video chatting, that they're a little bit more awkward or kind of don't know how to be in the presence physically of other people. I could see that being a negative reaction. The mental side of constantly scrolling through social media and letting that affect you. And then us being on the computer all the time and believing everything we read. Like there's threads and threads about the earth being flat, and you can believe whatever you want, but that's just an example of us constantly being on our phones and absorbing everything as truth, even though it isn't. So I think that there will be a lot of negative side effects. And then even on the physical side, I mean, if you constantly, like, let's say, sleep with your phone by your face, I'm sure that's probably not good for you. Now they've come out with my glasses are prescription, but I also have like the blue light filter because, we found that looking at screens can have an effect on us, and trying not to look at my phone 30 minutes before bed. There's just so many negative sides, I guess, to technology, not to go down a negative loop.
How about the positive sides? Now on the other side, it's not entirely a bad thing. What are some positive takeaways?
Being able to do something like this during the pandemic, right? So if we didn't have Skype, Zoom, and all this technology and being able to connect to each other, we wouldn't be able to be speaking right now. I wouldn't be able to FaceTime with my cousin in France and see the kid that he just had. So the reach, the being able to look up information, while there's a lot of things that just you can post on the internet, there's still a lot of good reach. A paper I'm writing is going to be an online academic journal. So I mean that, there's still good information out there. And in my own like design side, if I'm learning a new tool or struggling with something, I can quickly go to YouTube and be like, how do I do this in this menu bar in this program? So I think, accessibility to those things is really helpful. And yeah, that's probably the positives.
You touched on some things that we in the library business call information literacy, trying to figure out what's a good source and which sources you should use and how should you use them. And then within the ideal grant that we're administering, we talk about digital literacy a lot. What do you see as some key components to digital literacy?
Yeah, I can't remember who said it. I was listening to a TED Talk and they gave a good example of we pay for like Netflix, Hulu, and those kind of things. So someone's deciding what goes on there. But on the internet, it's like the wild, wild west. Anything can go on there. It's free access for everybody. Anybody can post anything. So if someone came out with a one-click button that would tell you the accuracy of something written, that would be amazing. But it's not that simple. Right now with all the things going on with politics, seeing something on my social media and, clicking an article, there's no sources. Someone just wrote it as fact, or the headline has nothing to do with the article. I think digital literacy could be a class on its own, training how to know what's fake and what's reliable. And even when it comes down to it, I guess you'll never truly know 100%, but you can take steps to try to find reliable information and maybe, train the algorithms on your computer to stop giving you so much crazy articles.
Yeah, there's a lot of clickbait out there. It all comes down to trust. Who do you trust? We say, oh, the New York Times is a trustworthy source, and that seems to be conventional wisdom. But everybody has a perspective, right? So it's very tricky. So, how do you plan on building on your existing research in the future? What are some of the projects you have in mind for the future that will build on the work you've already done?
Yeah, so with the Makey workshops that I've done, obviously I can't go to physical locations right now and do those, but hoping to bring that back up and just keep, doing these conferences, talks like this, and meeting with other people and collaborating on things and having feedback or conversations that spark an idea for something else. I don't have, a specific research plan, but definitely I've been writing more and thinking more about kind of what we spoke about with COVID and the pandemic. And I don't know what the result of that is yet.
Great. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today, Tristen. It is very interesting. Thank you for being part of IDEAL. And good luck in your continued research.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me in the conversation.